If you're in business, strategy, or especially procurement, there's one name you just can't avoid: Michael Porter. Today, we are breaking down his most iconic framework, the Five Forces, to see exactly how you can use it to get a strategic edge. Let's dive right in.
I mean, that's the big question, right? Whether you're trying to source the best possible materials, negotiate a better deal for your company, or just understand the world you're operating in, you need a map. You have to know where the power lies, what threats are just over the horizon, and where your real advantages are hiding.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll talk about mapping the competitive landscape. Then, we'll introduce the Five Forces framework itself before doing a deep dive into the power of buyers and suppliers. After that, we'll cover the other key pressures, and finally, we'll ask the big question: is this model still actually relevant today?
Okay, so most of us have probably done a SWOT analysis at some point, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and it's a great tool, but it's often very internally focused. Porter's model flips that completely. It forces us to look outward, to analyze the very structure of an industry to figure out what's really driving profitability.
Think about it. Have you ever wondered why some industries, like, say, software, just seem to be ridiculously profitable, while others, like airlines, are in this constant, brutal fight just to make a decent return? Well, Porter says it's not just luck. It is all about the underlying structure, the intensity of the competitive forces at play. If those forces are weak, lots of companies can make good money. But if they're intense, it's a real struggle.
So how do we systematically map these forces out? Well, we use a tool that, even though it was created way back in 1979, is still one of the most powerful ways to get your head around any industry. This, of course, is Porter's Five Forces, and it gives us a clear structure for understanding what really drives competition.
And here it is. The model breaks competition down into 5 key pressures. You've got the bargaining power of your buyers, the bargaining power of your suppliers, the threat of new companies entering the market, and the threat of substitute products. All of these then feed into the intensity of that 5th force, right there in the middle, the rivalry among existing competitors. Now, for anyone listening who's in procurement or supply chain, this right here is your home turf. This vertical axis, this constant tug of war between the power of your suppliers and the power of your buyers, this is where you live and breathe every single day. Getting this dynamic right is absolutely crucial.
So let's start with buyer power. This is all about the leverage that your customers have to drive your prices down or demand higher quality for the same price. When buyer power is high, they're the ones holding all the cards, and they can literally squeeze the profitability right out of your industry.
And this contrast is the strategic core of everything for procurement. Let's break it down. Buyer power goes through the roof when there are only a few of them buying in massive volumes, or when the product is basically a commodity and it's super easy for them to switch to someone else. On the flip side, supplier power becomes huge when there are only a couple of suppliers to choose from, when their product is unique, or when they could realistically threaten to become your competitor.
So, the key takeaway for you as a procurement professional is to recognize these levers. You gain a huge advantage when you can consolidate your company's purchasing into large volumes. You gain an advantage when you design your supply chain so you're not locked in with high switching costs. And of course, information is power. Having full market intelligence on what things really cost dramatically shifts the balance in your favor.
Okay, so beyond that core buyer-supplier dynamic, there are 3 other forces that complete the picture. Understanding these pressures from your rivals, from potential newcomers, and from substitutes is absolutely essential if you want that full 360-degree strategic view.
First up is the threat of new entrants. A good way to think about barriers to entry is like the moats and high walls around an industry's castle. These barriers could be things like needing massive amounts of capital, having incredible brand loyalty, or holding key patents. The higher those walls are, the safer the companies already inside the castle feel.
But when those barriers are low, or when a new player finds a way to just blow right past them, the effects can be absolutely earth-shattering. Look at the auto industry. For decades, the barriers seemed impossible to overcome. You needed huge factories, entrenched dealer networks, incredibly complex supply chains. And then Tesla showed up. By pioneering EV tech, building gigafactories, and selling directly to consumers, they didn't just climb the walls, they basically built a whole new kind of castle, leaving the legacy automakers scrambling to catch up.
Next, we have the threat of substitutes. And this is a subtle but really crucial distinction. A substitute isn't just a competitor's version of your product. It's a completely different way of getting the same job done. So the Eurostar train is a perfect substitute for a flight from London to Paris. For a procurement team sourcing copper, maybe a new composite material could be a powerful substitute. The more viable substitutes there are, the tighter the ceiling is on your industry's prices.
And finally, all of these other forces feed into the center: industry rivalry. When rivalry is intense, it's just a zero-sum game of price wars, advertising battles, and expensive innovation races. Now, for procurement, high rivalry among your suppliers is great news. It gives you leverage. But if you're in an industry with high rivalry, the pressure on your own margins is just relentless.
So Porter's Five Forces gives us this really powerful way to analyze an industry. I mean, it's been a cornerstone of business strategy for decades. But does a model from 1979 still apply in the fast-paced, digital-first world we live in today? This is where the debate gets really interesting.
Probably the biggest criticism you'll hear is that the model is static. It gives you a fantastic snapshot of an industry at a single point in time. But in an era of constant disruption, a snapshot can be a huge liability. The competitive landscape can shift literally overnight, and the model can have a hard time keeping up with the sheer speed of modern markets.
And this quote just nails the shift perfectly. As HBR author Nilofer Merchant puts it, Porter's world was really built for the 800-pound gorillas, these huge companies that dominated through sheer size and scale. But today's winners are often the agile gazelles. Think about Netflix just running circles around Blockbuster. Advantage now comes from being fast and flexible, not just being big.
And there are other valid criticisms too. The model at first kind of overlooked the power of complementary products, like gaming consoles and the games that actually drive their sales. It can also oversimplify really complex global value chains, which is something procurement pros deal with every day. And it focuses a lot more on how to get an advantage than on how to sustain.
So where does that leave us? Is this a timeless map for strategy, or is it more of a historical artifact? Well, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. The forces themselves, buyers, suppliers, rivals, new entrants, substitutes, they're timeless. They will always shape competition. The challenge today isn't to throw the map away, but to recognize that it's now a live, dynamic GPS. The forces haven't changed, but the speed at which they shift and interact certainly has. And for any strategist today, understanding that speed is everything.